your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. From Answer Media, this is the Atheist Manifesto. I'm your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my co-host, Ari Stillman. Ari, I missed you.
Oh, that's sweet. Sorry, hang on just a second. Sorry, I gotta take a drink here. Oh, sweet sis tears. I just got a glass full of them this week. If you're not on Facebook, I pity the fool who doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Oh God, yeah.
The sis have been way out of hand this week. That's all I'm gonna say. Go on the Pathos blog, and you'll see what exactly went down with the sis this week.
First up this week, everyone's favorite subject: pronouns. Hooray, pronouns! We've talked a lot on the show about all of the ridiculous excuses people come up with to not respect folks' usage of non-binary pronouns, like they or them. Something we haven't talked about on the show. There's a group of people who actually use non-binary pronouns other than they, them. And these pronouns are typically referred to as neo-pronouns. And while they're not super common, there are still quite a few people who use them. A listener of the show reached out to us and asked if we'd ever thought about doing a piece on these pronouns and folks who use them. And I thought it was a fantastic idea, so here we are. Our guest for this segment is Bismuth Hoban. Welcome to the show, friend.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. So your pronouns are Z and here, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and so just to clarify for listeners, for usage purposes, Z is the grammatical equivalent of he or she. So we'd say, like, Z went to the store, Z's over at my house, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And here is the grammatical equivalent of him or her. So we'd say, I gave here a hug, or I had dinner with here tonight. Is that right?
Exactly right.
Awesome.
Callie's got it. You got it down.
Basic
I've
grammar,
got the subject
yes.
nailed. Next guest, next segment. Let's get it done.
All right. Now that we've established that Callie's great at pronouns. So just give us the basic 101 about what neo-pronouns are. I know a lot of cis people who are listening probably have heard maybe a little bit about them, but not too much. What's the purpose of them, and where do they come from other than Tumblr?
So neo-pronouns have been a point of discussion in communities, both queer and non-queer, actually, for at least 40 years. In particular, the Z here pronoun is over 40 years old at this point. And the goal of them is always to try and find ways to represent experiences outside of the binary, or represent ways of speaking neutrally or extragenderedly. So Tumblr has quite a few that have been made up, but every pronoun's made up at one point or another. So there are, for example, the Spivak pronouns, which go AMR. There's Z here pronouns, there's C here pronouns, which are almost entirely co-opted from German for their sound, but are used in a neutral sense in English. And yeah, the goal has always been for people for whom they, them doesn't really carry enough of a sense of your position in gender. You've got these other options to use.
I know this is probably a really alien concept to most people listening. I use they, them pronouns, and a lot of people even have trouble with that, even though that's something that's in standard English. So just to give people an idea of what it's like to use these pronouns, would you mind just talking about why is it that you gravitate towards these pronouns instead of he, she, or they? Or is there something that your pronouns accomplish for you that those other sets of pronouns don't?
I think for me, when I was really starting to work out at age 25 that I wasn't really anywhere in the binary gender zone, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I'd want to be addressed. I'd been working pretty heavily with a lot of younger trans folk at my university at the time. So I'd been hearing a lot about the different pronouns being used, and I spent a lot of time thinking about they, them as something I'd be really comfortable with. But the people I knew who used they, them had a very different experience of gender to what I was going through. And at the time, I sat down, I took a couple of days to really think it through, and playing around with everything, Z here just felt like it fit better into the flow of what I wanted to sound like. I wanted to have that particular verbal quality of the Z and the he. And I don't know why, but it just felt right. Since then, I've played with the idea a bit more, and unfortunately in some cases have had to abandon it in certain social situations in preference for they, them. But it's enough of a challenge to cis people that it gives them the chance to reconsider certain assumptions, but it's close enough to how things work grammatically for he and she, as Kelly did with the examples earlier on, that there's an intuitive understanding of how to use it if people put the effort in.
Do you have any sort of, I don't know, like a template that you use or anything to teach people about these pronouns? Like, I know, for example, with they, I get a lot of pushback about, it's not grammatically correct, so I have to go through this whole spiel about how it actually is grammatically correct, and, people use singular they all the time. Is there any kind of spiel that you typically give people when they have questions about how your pronouns work?
Honestly, I do a lot of what Callie did at the start of this episode, which is walk people through exactly how you use it in particular sentences. And, I just have a kind of few stock standard sentences I'll go through with people to explain it to them at the start and kind of gently correct them as they test it out, because a lot of people will often get the conjugation wrong as it is. Like, they'll be using here when they should be using Z, or they'll use Z, like just Z, when they should be using a possessive, for example.
Yeah, I've been to some groups where when you introduce yourself and you give your name and pronouns, you also just say a sentence that conjugates the pronouns. I don't know if conjugate is the right word, but
I keep thinking it
just
mustn't
goes through all
be,
the different forms of the pronouns. Yeah, because conjugate is for verbs, not for pronouns. I'm not sure exactly what you would call that, but what do you do when somebody makes a mistake on your pronouns or they refuse to use your pronouns? Because I know a lot of people don't realize this, but we actually have a conversion chart for pronouns. So there's like a certain number of times where people can get your pronouns wrong, and then after that you're allowed to pinch them or you're allowed to call them a name. And it does the chart for your pronouns go all the way up to like biological warfare, or does it kind of trail off at semi-automatic weapons, or how does that whole thing work for your pronouns that you use?
Honestly, in a lot of cases, I back down first. Like I mentioned before, in a lot of situations socially, I've gotten to the point where I'll just say to people, look, if you're not good at using them, just use they, them. It's fine. I often make that kind of peace offering towards people who aren't very good with the non-binary and neo-pronouns, which I feel like maybe I should be a bit more harsh on, but at the same time, I want to smooth out some of the stuff every now and then. But there have been cases where just straight up putting that person out of my social circles has been the response to some behaviors. So for me, I'd probably stop just shy of semi-automatic weapons. But if I could get my hands on one, I'd think about it.
Well, right, yeah, because you're in Australia, so that's not a thing.
It's really not a thing. And
exactly.
I'm kind of glad it's not a thing as well.
These questions.
And so I actually grew up in the far north end of Queensland, where there's quite a lot more guns because people go pig hunting. So, I mean, if I need it, I know where I would go for one.
I find it interesting that you say that you kind of make concessions with pronouns if people aren't really able to get their head around them, because my understanding was that people who use neo-pronouns are just looking for a lot of attention and want an excuse to argue with cis people and make them feel bad for not being able to grasp the pronouns on the very first try. Is that accurate? Are there a bunch of people out there who are just trying to pick fights with people over their pronouns?
I personally love picking fights with cis people constantly. That's my pastime. That's how I get, up in the morning, and it keeps me motivated.
True.
Yes. All of us neo-pronoun users are terrible, evil attention seekers, except for the most part, most of us aren't really interested. It's just gender feels very difficult to deal with for all trans people in a variety of ways. And I think from what I've seen of people who use pronouns outside of he, she, or they, it's really just about finding that spot that feels comfortable for you and being able to be recognized for that. It's not often worth the fight. A lot of us will have backup pronouns that we tell people to use if things aren't going well, because at the end of the day, we just rather be seen on one of our terms than none of our terms.
How overwhelmingly reasonable of you.
Unfortunately, yes. It does mean that I've held off on a lot of arguments with my parents, that's for sure.
Right. This is something that I've noticed in the last probably about 2 years, maybe like 1.5 years. So I'm curious to get your perspective on this. Like you probably know a lot more people who use neo-pronouns than I do. But so when I was first coming into the non-binary world in like 2013, I was seeing neo-pronouns a lot. And now it seems like I'm not seeing them hardly ever. And I only think I know one person who still uses neo-pronouns. Most of them have shifted to they, and some of them have even shifted to he or she because their understanding of their own gender has changed. I'm interested to see if that's something that you've noticed as well, and if so, why do you think that is? Is it that people are becoming more comfortable with they pronouns because they're realizing that it's not grammatically incorrect?
I mean, there is a part of that we are successfully pushing it back against this really tired and boring idea that they has never been used as a singular. Like, I'm very happy about that happening now. At the same time, I think I've seen plenty of younger people embracing neo-pronouns as they get into their gender expression. So I think for me, at least from the perspective I've been looking at it, a lot of that is fatigue. Right. Pronoun fatigue, basically. Like, the edges are just starting to wear off because we're having to constantly jam the pronoun in where people are refusing to let it in. I know in my case, like, shifting to telling people they is an option has meant that in a lot of the community groups I'm in, I'm just they. Because there's so few people who are able to pull off the ze, here pronouns. So I think in a lot of ways it is that our ideas of gender change a lot as we live. Like, that's just one of the things that happens, I think. You know, I've shifted the way I describe myself an enormous amount of times in the 5 or so years since I really started to embrace it. But at the same time, there is a particular kind of disinterest in learning about and using neo-pronouns correctly that means it can get really exhausting to try and insist on them. And I think there is a case to be made that people abandon neo-pronouns in some places and sometimes because it's just not worth the push anymore.
Right. I can imagine even as exhausting as it is for me to constantly correct people on they pronouns, it must be more exhausting when it's a pronoun that's not used at all in standard English and people just have no concept of how these are used.
Yeah, it can be pretty tiring, but also trying to use they is extremely tiring. I tried to use they professionally when I was out at my previous job. I'm not out at my current one because not worth it. But yeah, trying to use they was as much of an uphill battle in that context as using ze and here was in a more like trans community context.
Other than what we've already covered, is there anything that you wanted our listeners to know about how neo-pronouns work or the people who use them, or any resources that you would recommend for people to look into if they want to learn more about it, or if they have someone in their life who uses neo-pronouns that they want to be able to address correctly?
So it really surprised me when I first started doing this, but referring people onto the page on Wikipedia, of all places, about neutral pronouns outside of they and them, the page that Wikipedia has a really comprehensive chart that shows all the different forms of each one and how to use them. It gives examples. It's honestly one of the best resources I've ever had on hand to show people. The other thing I'd love to say is that just take a moment to find out why that person is using it if they feel like talking about that with you, because I've had people make some really bizarre assumptions about my personal position and why I chose to do it.
Ooh, like what?
My absolute favorite, this is one of my favorite, like, just, I cannot believe a person said this to me, but I'm going to keep it in my pocket forever, was I had run into a person I hadn't really spoken to since before I came out. We talked, I explained my pronouns, and his response was, well, that's a bit classist of you, isn't it?
Wait, what?
And
how do you get to that?
He began to lecture me about how the expectation for people to use neo-pronouns was representative of a class privilege that expected people to have a certain level of education and a certain level of familiarity that could only come from an academic context. And it was just sitting there on this lovely little kind of over-the-river bar at the Brisbane Powerhouse and thinking, okay, there's so many things to unpack here, but you're actually not worth a single one of them. I'm going to go back inside.
Right. Yeah,
I've never talked to that person again.
I'm going to go. Fantastic. I'm going to go just like shove my face in boiling water because that would probably be more fun at this point. So yeah. God.
I was thinking you were going to say people assumed that you were alien gender or something, which probably has also happened.
I haven't had that one yet. I've had a lot of weird questions, like, you know, friends who are generally well-meaning, saying things like when I was talking about starting to look towards hormone replacement therapy, saying, oh, so I can finally just call you she now. Like,
swing and a miss.
I understand where you're coming from, but no. So just, assume that the pronoun they're telling you is the one they want, full stop. And if you're really curious about what they get out of it, approach them in the sense of, hey, I'm wondering why this works for you. Don't go, why do you feel you have to use that one? Because, we feel like we're being difficult enough already sometimes. It's a constant feel. So approach in the spirit of, I'd like to understand more, not you need to justify yourself to me. But that's pretty standard with every trans thing ever, so...
Right. Yeah, so you just apply it here. It's easy enough. Well, this was awesome. Very informative. It's kind of a new concept for me, too, so I learned a lot. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time, especially this early in the morning for you.
I'm glad to help out.
We interrupt the show once again to shamelessly beg for your money. This kind of activism is tough and we need your support. Our patrons totally get it. This week, we're using the money we get from Patreon to put together a custom-built rocket to launch Caitlyn Jenner into the sun. I know you're as tired of her as I am, so get on board and let's do the trans community and the world a favor. Head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto to find out more and to hear our uncut interview with Gleb Sapersky about rationality and politics and making people care about the truth. Though I'm sure you'll just go for the whole launching Caitlyn Jenner into the sun thing, and that's okay. Toward the end of last year, Oxford Dictionary declared post-truth their word of the year. They define it this way: relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And I know this is something that gets thrown around pretty casually these days, but I think in a nutshell, it's fair to say that this concept and the things that grow from it are the explanation, or at least a big part of the explanation, for why fuckface von Clownstick won the presidency. Well, there's at least one member of the secular community who's taking this all very seriously and has launched a campaign to bring truth and rationality into politics. Gleb Sapersky is the founder of the Rational Politics Project.
What our goal is with the Rational Politics Project is to get people to be more oriented toward the truth than they currently are. We have people like us who are more reason-oriented already care about the truth, and it's really hard for us to grasp that so many people out there don't, that we really are outliers from the majority of the population. And speaking to them in a way that's, presents facts first and logic first simply doesn't work for them. That's what the research in behavioral science shows. So I'm a scholar, I'm in behavioral science, and we're trying to use behavioral science to speak to people where they are.
Now, it seems pretty outrageous to me that this is a conversation we even need to have. Why the hell do we have to convince people to care about truth? Of course, we basically know the answer. When Gleb reached out to me the first time, one of my first questions was about whether or not this was actually a new phenomenon. We hear politicians brazenly lie all the time. Is this all really new?
My thoughts on that is that it really is on a different level, and there's a quite new phenomenon where politicians not simply lie, but they don't back away from their lies when they're called out. So that is the new thing. Oxford Dictionary chose post-truth as a result of the Trump election and Brexit. In both of those, especially the Trump election, we saw situations where there was very clear evidence that mainstream politicians like Trump and his administration, and then the Leave side of the Brexit campaign, were lying. They were called out on their lies, and instead of backing away, they doubled down on their lies and actually attacked those people who called them out on their lies.
The next logical question is why? If this is really a new phenomenon, or at least something that's happening on a different level than it used to, what's the explanation? The obvious answer is social media, or at least one of the obvious answers. I've heard claims more than once that Trump was memed into the presidency, but Gleb says there's more to it than that.
Research from the most recent polls that I have at my disposal shows that about 62% of adults in the US are getting their news from social media, which is up from something like 49% in 2014. So that's kind of one thing. And people who are getting their news mainly from social media generally aren't able to discern, to tell whether the news is high quality or not. So a study by Stanford University showed that they were conducting a study on students, high school, middle, high school, college students, they showed that about 80% of study participants couldn't tell apart a Facebook post that was shared by their friend from a Facebook post that was sponsored, so an advertisement. Then the people used really weird things, weird to me, things to determine the credibility of a post. So, for example, many people thought that a post on Facebook was more credible if it had a larger photo.
And this episode gets the explicit tag just for this one. Are you fucking kidding me? I don't know. Let's keep going.
Another big factor is the deterioration of the news media and decrease in trust of the news media. So in the United States, over the last couple of decades, the news media has been decreasing. I think something like more than half of reporters have been fired, so there's less investigative journalism. The journalism that there is of lesser quality because less people are focused on it. They kind of more do reprinting of news that are passed out, so there's less evaluation, fact-checking. There's more opinion-driven reporting. People want to hear opinions, and they gravitate to sources that are opinion-based, which is one reason why Fox News is so popular and MSNBC News is becoming more popular, as well as lack of trust in the media due to political actions. So Trump has been notorious for attacking the media. From 2015 to 2016, trust among Republicans in the media has dropped by more than half. It was in the mid-30s, now it's in the teens.
At this point, I'm still kind of fixated on why. I mean, we've explained the mechanism, how it works in practice, but why does this work? Why is all of this post-truth stuff effective?
We don't have education on how to evaluate information, especially on social media. So the traditional means of getting information to people has been through vetted sources like newspapers and TV, which have reasons due to their credibility and ethical standards to report news accurately. So people didn't really need that much education in how to evaluate the media. Now, I would certainly have liked people to have information. There are certain systematic problems with the reporting of news due to news ownership. Now, when there was the transition to social media and 62% of the population getting their information from social media, not only, but at least some of their information, there's no control on social media. There's no vetting of sources on social media. And as we can see from these studies from Stanford University, people really can't tell what's a sponsored post and what's not sponsored post. They can't tell what's a good thing and what's not a good thing.
Okay, so we've done a pretty good examination of the problem. My next question is, how do we solve it? What are the practical ways we can take this information and make things better? Gleb had a great example of this. You may have heard me talk on the show a few times about going on conservative talk radio in Cincinnati to talk about trans issues. One of the hosts I've been on with is named Scott Sloan. He's a pretty moderate Republican, and as moderate Republicans go, he seems to be a halfway reasonable guy. Gleb had a chat with Scott about the demonizing and stereotyping of Muslims, and was actually able to change Scott's mind on the issue. Check it out.
There was an attack at Ohio State University by a Muslim who rammed his car into some students and then ran around with a knife and stabbed some people before he was shot. So that's what I was on Scott Sloan's show to talk about. Now, as a conservative, like you said, he's a half-decent conservative, but he's a conservative. He was quite critical of Muslims in this situation. And so I talked to him about this, and I didn't say, you shouldn't be critical of Muslims. That's not about, that's not just, that's not fair, that's not civil rights. These are things that I care about. I care about justice, civil rights, fairness, and that makes me a liberal. So research by Jonathan Haidt and others shows that that's what liberals care about. Conservatives care more about other things. They care about things like security and safety, purity and traditionalism, but in this case, security and safety was the overriding concern. So I didn't talk to Scott Sloan about what I cared about. I talked to him about what he cared about. I made an emotional connection with him. So getting him to care about the truth for making an emotional connection. I said, hey, Scott, it's natural to feel angry about this. It's natural to feel frustrated. This is what we as human beings feel. So when we experience such a frightening thing, and we all want safety and security. I want safety and security. To me, it's secondary to other concerns. But I made an honest statement that we both want safety and security, knowing that he cared about safety and security foremost. So let's look at the number of attacks by Muslims. In 2015, statistics show that Muslims committed 6 attacks on terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. Now, there are about nearly 2 million adult Muslims in the United States, 1.8 million to be exact. And so if we divide 1.8 million by 6, we get 1 in 300,000. So 1 in 300,000 Muslims will commit a terrorist attack per year. If you focus on Muslims, you get so many false positives. You have 299,999 out of 300,000 are not going to do anything. That if you focus our resources of safety and security on evaluating Muslims, we will miss the actual terrorists. We will be less safe and secure, Scott, if we do that. So that's one. Then I said, imagine if we persecute Muslims, what will happen? Well, Muslim communities are going to be much less likely to cooperate with us, Scott, and they will be much less likely to help us address the terrorists in their midst. Currently, the FBI is quite cooperative with Muslim communities. Now, if we start persecuting them, they will not be so cooperative. And that's the second thing I told to Scott. And finally, I said, we already have evidence that ISIS and other terrorist groups are trying to recruit Muslims within the United States using Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric against Muslims. And so if we have more persecution of Muslims, we will have more terrorists in the United States, Scott. So we'll be less safe. So all three of these things make us less safe and secure. And as a result of that, he was quite willing to update his beliefs and say that, well, okay, despite the fear and anger that I may experience toward Muslims, we need to be kind and generous toward them, even if we don't feel like it. And he made that statement on air, which is quite relevant to what his audience believes. So I took him through this track of empathizing with him. And so here are the meta strategies. Empathizing, putting yourself on the same side as him, then guiding him through to realizing how his proposed solution to the problem won't actually address his underlying concerns, his underlying emotions, and then showing him what will actually address his underlying concerns and emotions.
Intuitively, this kind of makes sense, right? It seems to be one possible way, maybe the easiest way, to circumvent someone's cognitive bias. It's obviously not going to always work on someone who's firmly entrenched or someone whose values are so counter to your own that you may not be able to empathize with them or use these strategies. But I think if you're a person who's out to change minds, this is at least a good approach to try. It's important to point out that if we're talking about making change for marginalized groups, this approach takes a metric shit ton of emotional energy. I don't think anyone in those positions should feel obligated to do this. I would never tell anyone they should feel obligated to empathize and validate people who are doing harm to them. But if it's something you feel like you can do, maybe give it a try. I think this approach can especially be effective for allies who may have less of a personal stake and therefore won't be as hurt by those conversations. If you're interested in learning more about what Gleb is trying to do with the Rational Politics Project, you can check out intentionalinsights.org to find out more. Gleb has also launched what he calls the Pro-Truth Pledge. It's a pledge you can take that affirms your commitment to truth in politics and discourse. Gotta be honest, I thought it was a little cheesy when I first heard about it, but when he explained more to me, I'm kind of convinced. So you can find that at protruthpledge.org if that sounds interesting to you and you want to check it out. Last up this week, if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you know that gender dysphoria is one of my least favorite things in the world. In fact, I went on hormones that sterilized me and will be getting painful and expensive surgeries to alleviate it. So, yeah, it sucks and I hate it with every fiber of my being. What we don't often talk about, and probably should talk about more honestly, is gender euphoria. And these are the feelings that we feel when things just go right in terms of our gender, when we're feeling just the right amount of feminine or masculine or in between that matches up directly with our identity and how we see ourselves. It can be as awesome as dysphoria is awful. I posted something on Facebook a while ago asking for trans friends of mine to relate some experiences they've had, and we've picked some here to read along with some of our own euphoric experiences. This one comes from my friend Daniel. Daniel says, after I began T, or testosterone, from the first shot, something I did not expect. The disorganization and anxiety quieted, things felt more right. I expected it to take years when I finally got read as male for things to feel better, but for me personally, having the right chemicals in my brain finally lifted a 28-year weight I had been unknowingly carrying. It was a beautiful thing. And the reason I picked Daniel's to read is because I actually had the same experience going the other direction on estrogen. so weird because when I initially started estrogen, I had in my head, estrogen's going to give me boobs and it's going to reshape my body and reshape my face. Like I had just the physical sorts of things in mind. And I imagine there would be emotional consequences too, because we all know that estrogen is a hell of a drug. But the thing that I didn't expect is that life just made more sense. It's a really weird thing to try to describe, but before, when I would feel feelings of any kind, sadness, anger, happiness, any of that kind of stuff, it always felt like I was experiencing those emotions in a way that wasn't the way I should be experiencing them. Like if I was really happy about something, I should be happier. If I was sad, I should feel more sad. It felt like things were kind of blunted. They weren't as intense as they should be. So, the way that I liken it is like watching, like I was seeing the world in DVD quality, and now I'm seeing it in 4K UHD. Things just made that much more sense. And when I would feel feelings after my, hormone levels kind of leveled out, when I would feel things like sadness or anger or happiness, it was like the puzzle pieces fit correctly. Things just made sense. There was no thought of like, gosh, this feeling doesn't feel right to me. It just made sense. And there's a really funny story behind this. So there was one night I was having a really bad couple of weeks. This was when I was still at my old job, and I was just absolutely miserable with that job and not being able to be out at work. But I'd been on hormones for a few months at this point, and I read this silly Calvin and Hobbes comic, and I don't know if anybody's seen this, but it went around Facebook 2-3 years ago, and it was a final Calvin and Hobbes comic. And for those who don't know, Calvin and Hobbes, old like newspaper comic about a boy and his stuffed tiger that came alive. And this was Calvin as an old man on his deathbed, and Hobbes comes to visit him one last time. And it probably would have made me tear up a little anyways, but with the sort of weirdness that I had been going through and how deeply depressed I had been, it was too much. And I ugly cried for probably 15 or 20 minutes after that. And after I had calmed down a little bit, I noticed that there wasn't that dissonance between the way that I was feeling and the way that I was supposed to be feeling. That reaction made sense to me in terms of who I was. So like it obviously wasn't pleasant to ugly cry because I was I was excising all of the awfulness at my old job and how miserable I was. It wasn't just, this cute little comic. That was just kind of the thing that opened the floodgates. But it made sense. It felt right. Even though it didn't feel good, it felt right. I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure I was explaining myself right.
Here's one that I related to a lot. This is from Kim. Kim said, I was trying on the idea of being non-binary. I decided a test period was required, and if it felt right or wrong, I would take next steps. There was too much questioning, and it had to come down to some kind of system. Anyway, I went clothes shopping for the first time with the idea of being non-binary in my mind, and I just got so giddy. Logically, I knew before I could wear any clothes because, of course, I could, but this time all the mental barriers were gone. I could shop in every section because all clothes were for me. This was the first time I actually ever enjoyed clothes shopping.
That's awesome.
I definitely relate to that, being non-binary. Like, I go all over the place in the stores. I go in the junior section for jeans and shirts. I'm usually getting from like the boys section, and sometimes I'd get like button downs from either the boys section or from the junior section because I'm small and can't wear women's sizes. So it is fun to like go around and just realize like there's no restrictions. I can wear anything I want, and even if someone's looking at me weird because I'm in the, little boys section looking at t-shirts, I'm like, whatever. I like these t-shirts. They're for me. That I'm going to wear what I want to wear.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, that sounds sort of analogous to what it's like for me shopping in the women's section. It's just the freedom to be there. Now that I've accepted who I am, this is the thing that I've always wanted to do, and I now can. Regardless if that's, if you're a trans guy shopping in the men's section, a non-binary person shopping wherever the hell you want, any of that kind of stuff.
I had that experience recently when I was doing my interviews for grad school. I had to like get new clothes and stuff, and the last time I did interviews was when I had first moved to Illinois, and I wore like a frilly pink top thing that I would never wear now because I can't wear it with a binder. I was like, no, there's no way I'm wearing clothes like that anymore. So I went out, and, it took a while because as a small person, it's not easy to find, masculine, androgynous looking professional clothing, but I eventually found a button-down shirt from the boys section that came with a clip-on tie, and I put my blazer on top and wore some kind of tight-fitting khaki pants, and I was like, yeah, I am feeling this. It's awesome. It was the first time that I ever felt good about professional clothing, because I was always forced to wear like frilly clothes or dresses or whatever else to impress, or not really impress, but just to get along with what was expected of me. So that was the first time that I could ever dress professionally in a way that I thought actually expressed who I am, and it felt really awesome.
And you look damn smooth in that outfit too, by the way.
like
you were suave as hell.
I was so surprised, because I'm usually like, oh, I feel so dysphoric because like I have to wear a bra to go with this top, and I hate wearing bras, and it was really awesome to see myself like looking nice in a way that feels genuine to how I want to present.
And so my next one comes from Alyssa. Alyssa says, when I look at myself in the mirror and I don't see any of the parts of me that fill my darker moods with worry, then I'm not the lady with a little too much brow and neck and shoulders and hands wondering if her breasts will ever fit properly in her bra, but me, smooth and beautiful with all the curves I ever wanted and a body that most people envy. It happens a lot in summer when my shorts, miniskirts, and crop tops are out in force. It happens when I have an occasion that warrants getting a little fancy. It happens when I wear statement necklaces and strappy sandals. It happens when I do a better job with my makeup than usual, or someone else does it. It happens when I try on new clothes. It happens when my partners gush about my tiny size and let me feel not too big for a little while. It happens when my feminine body language is out in force and when I can gush freely about cute things. It happens a lot more often now. And the reason this speaks to me is because one of the first really gender euphoric experiences that I had was actually looking in a mirror after I had been sort of made over for the first time. And I had a very good friend who was the first person that I had said, these are the feelings that I'm struggling with and I'm not sure what to do with it. And, basically her first response was, well, like, let's get you made up. So like we went clothes shopping.
Come on, girl, let's go shopping.
Right. Like it was amazing. And she brought over her makeup. She did my hair. And even though I had shorter hair at the time, she still made it fancy looking. And I looked in the mirror, and I'm not exaggerating to say that I almost passed out, because it was, I don't know how to say this without sounding like it's new agey or woo or whatever, but it honestly just felt like I was actually seeing myself for the first time. What I was seeing in the mirror made sense to me for the first time, because when I was living life pre-transition, my clothes most of the time, it was like gym shorts and t-shirts. I was a pretty frumpy, quote unquote, dude. Didn't really care a lot about my appearance because I didn't like who I was. It's probably more accurate to say that I didn't care about who I was. I didn't hate myself so much as I just didn't care, because nothing about what I saw made sense. And this time it finally did. And that was one of the first times that I knew, like, wow, this is not just a phase for me. This is not just, I like to cross dress, or this is some kind of fetish or something like that. It was the first time that I was like, wow, this really is who I am. And it was one of the most wonderful feelings I've ever felt. And that's something that I still have sometimes, when I put a little extra time into my hair, I put a little extra time into my makeup, and I find this really cute outfit. And my thing lately has been like really cute business casual outfits, because they just changed our dress code at work, which like I'm not a fan of, but I'm not a fan of dress codes in general, but I do actually enjoy dressing that way. So like it's not actually personally a problem for me. And I had an interview for a promotion, and I was like, I'm gonna buy a new outfit, because I had business casual clothes, but I don't know if I had business casual clothes that were fancy enough for interviewing for a promotion. So I went out and I got a pencil skirt, white button-up shirt, white jacket, and a black tie. And so like basically I looked like one of the women Men in Black characters. And I mean, that's exactly the look that I was going for. And I remember when I looked in the mirror for the first time, I was like, holy shit, that is me. That is so me. That is like everything on the outside matches the inside for right now. And it was just, it's really hard to explain how amazing that is when it happens, because I think a lot of times maybe people who don't deal with that I mean, maybe they do, right? I mean, you don't have to be trans to have body issues or to have issues with your own appearance. So maybe that is a familiar feeling. I just know when something like that happens in reference to gender, I mean, it is as much of a high as dysphoria is low.
This one I related to so much because this is basically trans masculine kid, the Facebook comment. This is from Destin. Recently, I wanted to change a simple thing about my appearance, my hair. I wanted it short and easily spiked. My mom said she didn't think I should do that because, quote, if it looks like you want to be a boy, that's not professional, unquote. Oh, I heard that so many times. I kept bringing it up with her because she's in control of my finances and I don't drive, so I figured I needed her help to get a haircut. She would not budge. A trans friend of mine volunteered to go with me to get my haircut as she needed one too. Turned out the haircut was just $10, so I could afford to pay for it in cash. I got my haircut and spiked, and I felt very euphoric about it. My friends said, "You look like a badass." Except for my family, everyone who has seen my hair has complimented it. Even the counselor for the local vocational rehabilitation center, she didn't think it was unprofessional. Oh, man. Yes. So, yes. I had this, especially with makeup, because I never liked wearing makeup at all. And my mom would always try to get me, especially for like job interviews when I got older. She'd be like, "You should put on some makeup because it looks more professional." And I'm like, "No, I hate makeup." And no one ever thought the makeup was a big deal, like except for her. The first time I got my first really short haircut, I think it was in 11th grade, maybe 12th grade, can't remember, but I got so many compliments on it and it felt great. And that was several years before I knew what non-binary was or had any idea that I was trans at all. But I just really liked having short hair because I just liked the way it looked. I liked the way it felt. And people were saying I looked like Audrey Hepburn. And that was kind of cool. And everyone except for my mom liked it. And I was just like, well, it doesn't matter what she thinks because it's my hair. So I can do what I want with it. Boom.
Yeah, I think to myself all the time that like I would probably have more of those euphoric moments if I cared more about my hair. Like, I just like I've always been so bad with straighteners, and I think it was just because I didn't have patience. Because when I have patience and spend the right time to do it right, I love it. Right? I mean, I spend so much time doing the show and that kind of stuff. It's like I don't have a half hour to take before work. I have about 10 minutes like to take to get ready before work. But yeah, I mean, when I got my first like super feminine haircut, it was kind of the same thing. I had a friend who was super supportive, and it was somebody that I went to high school with, and she's like, "Hey, come in, I'll get you a discount. We'll do this up right." And I told her what I wanted, and she gave me almost what I wanted, but I actually liked what she gave me better than what I wanted because she's a hairstylist and that's her job. And I know it doesn't always work out that way, but yeah, and it was that I was like, I took a picture and it was another one of those moments. Holy shit, that's me. That's one more step toward the outside matching the inside, and yeah, it's an indescribably awesome feeling.
And the thing that really caught me about Destin's story was the role of, sorry, I don't know Destin's pronouns. They're, his, I don't know. Sorry, the role of Destin's friend in this, because that's the thing that I find the most validating is when your friends or even people that you don't necessarily even know very well are so validating and they don't even realize what it means to you. Like when I first came out as non-binary and I went to visit some of my childhood friends who I had known since like kindergarten, first grade, and I was wearing my first binder and it wasn't even a good binder. It was terrible, but you know, it did a little bit of stuff. My friends were asking me about it and what my gender experience was, and one of my friends just said, "It's a really good look for you." And I was just like, "Oh, that's so sweet." It wouldn't matter if you thought it didn't look good because I would still do it. But I just thought it was great that she went out of her way to say something nice about what I was doing. And then something you did, Callie, just a few weeks ago when we were in Nashville for NanoCon and we were talking about names in the car. And you told me that Ari was like basically the perfect name for me and you can't think of me any other way. And you actually knew my name before I changed it to Ari. And you were like, "Yeah, I never thought that fit you." And that was really validating too, because I never liked it either. And it was just great that like, it doesn't matter if you like my name or not. Of course, it doesn't matter if you think that it suits me, but it's just nice to hear that everyone realizes that I made the right decision and that this was a name that was perfect for me. And that's how I feel about it too. I think it was the perfect name and I don't regret it at all. I'm super excited every time I use it. I'm like, oh my God, that's my name. It's a great name. I love it. It fits me so well.
I mean, I feel the same way about my name. I never assume that I pass just because I don't have that kind of confidence. But a lot of times when I tell people my name, they ask me about my parents naming me. So I'm guessing that's because they assume that I'm cis. I don't know. And not that that matters a lot, but just when people do that, that's a validating thing too. And I think what it comes down to, this entire conversation, I just thought of this. I think what it really comes down to, we've talked a lot on the show about validation from other people and how important that is, and seeing representation in the media and being included in conversations, because all of those things are validating, because we live in a world that really seeks to invalidate who we are and invalidate our experiences. So it's awesome when other people do validating things like that. And I think what we've been sort of dancing around in this conversation, talking about gender euphoria, is that kind of internal validation.
Yes.
When something just goes right, you get the right outfit, you get the right makeup and hair combination, or the right combination of no makeup and hair, depending on what your expression is. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is internal validation, and I think that's super important too. So yeah, I guess the moral of the story is that we talk a lot about the awful things that go on in the world of queerness and transness, and the awful things that happens to people. And those are all obviously very valid things. But I also think it's important to note that we do have those euphoric experiences. Like, it's not all misery and and awfulness. The whole reason that we pursue transition, to whatever degree we pursue it to, is to pursue those feelings so we can feel comfortable in ourselves and feel validated in ourselves and feel good that our outsides match our inside, whatever that means, whether it means masculine, feminine, non-binary, androgynous, in any space on that spectrum. I think that's really what it's about.
The thing about having other people validate you is not that they're just going along with it because they respect you and they're going to refer to you how you want to be referred, which is of course great. But then also when they see you exactly how you actually are, and you don't have to monitor what they're saying or worry that they're going to get something wrong. They just get who you are. That's the thing that is the most validating to me.
Speaking of validation, I know we're off topic a little bit here, but I think this is an awesome story. There's a friend from the music scene. I've known him for years. Our bands played together all the time. And we're friends. We weren't close friends, but we were friends. I really, really like the guy. He's an extraordinarily good guy. And I saw him at Pride. I hadn't seen him because I'd stopped playing music at that point. And when we saw each other, it was like, oh shit, here's somebody that I haven't seen since I've come out. Is this going to be weird? I know he knew because we're friends on Facebook. That wasn't a concern, but it was just like, oh God, is this going to be awkward? Is this going to be weird? And he just runs up to me and he gives me a hug and he's like, oh my God, it's so good to see you, sweetie. And and I was like, whoa, he called me sweetie. And it's like, I know a lot of people find that condescending. For me, coming from people that I know, I actually really like it. I find it endearing. And it's like, wow, he's addressing me that way because that's how he sees me. Like you said, he's not just going along with it. This is, he actually understands and sees and knows who I am. And that's all there is to it. At that point, it was almost more complicated for me than it was for him. So yeah, validation and gender euphoria.
Happy fun time.
Right. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gay Theist Manifesto. Big shout out to Elena and Ingrid this week for giving us 2 of our show topics. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gay Theist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GayTheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. And I'm sure Ari has a really cool outro since they haven't been on the last 2 episodes.
Well, we've talked about this a lot. I think ever since I came on, we've been kicking around this idea, but it is official. The cis genocide has begun. If you've been keeping up with me on social media, you'll know that I have recently advocated for the death of all cis people, as I hate them because their genders are inferior. And, it's time. We've been dancing around, and I think the time has come for us to act and to get our vengeance. So I'm going to be distributing arms. You are going to need to find me on Facebook at Ari Stillman, or you can email me at aristillman4@gmail.com. And pay close attention because this is the only place you're going to get this information. The password is scum. Repeat, the password is scum. You're going to need to contact me. give me that password and I will be distributing you a weapon of some sort. If you are a self-hating cis, you are also welcome to join. And if you are truly down for the cause, you will sacrifice yourself for your trans siblings. That's all I'm going to say. Further updates will be on the SJW Circle Jerk with Jeremiah Traeger, one of the self-hating cis that I mentioned previously. It's here. The time has come. Everyone get ready. Stay safe, except for cis people. Don't stay safe.
Shit's about to get real. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/The Manifesto and make a per episode donation to help the show out. If that's not something you can do, you can always head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. More listeners, always a good thing for the show. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Manifesto.